Welcome into week 7, ladies and gentlemen. It's here, and it has never been better. Welcome into the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show live here on the Bettor Sports Network. I am Eric Balkman from the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, and of course, the FFPC. You can follow me on Twitter at Eric Balkman. Want to welcome in my co-host for this evening. He is the director of fantasy and gambling for the 33rd team. You follow him on Twitter at JLarky Tweets. You follow him on TikTok at JLarky Talks. You hear him on SiriusXM Fantasy Thursdays at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. And of course, joining me on the show tonight, very excited for this, Josh Larkey. Welcome in, man.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. I looked at the show sheet, and I think we got a good one. So I think people are going to enjoy the Thursday night talk. They're going to enjoy some of these start-sit questions. I'm ready for this.
So number one, this is going to be fun for two reasons. It seems like you've been on everybody's show recently, and so you're all warmed up for it. I know you did Goat District on Tuesday.
That was
night,
last
right?
night.
Last night,
yeah.
And so what I did was, and by the way, shout out to Sean Engel and Tyler Soto, the producers tonight. And Tyler does a great job putting a rundown together every single week. But I like to tweak it. I like to edit it. And you, my friend, because all the content you put out at the 33rd team, it was real easy to add in some stuff tonight because I feel like I'm trying to tee you up for some of your takes because I think they're strong and they're good and they're informative and they're going to help a lot of people. So thank you to you who gets you get co-producer credit on this tonight because you actually a lot of the content you produce is going to be on the show tonight. I want to remind everybody to play the FFPC Weekly Challenge. There's no draft or salary cap. If you want to play in the slim format without kickers and defenses, pick 10 teams, only one player per team. You want to pick the classic format where you have kickers and defenses, again, one player per team, and then you can ride it out through the duration of week 7. Just get them in by 1 p.m. Eastern time Sunday for kickoff. $35 or $200 to enter. If you want to enter in that 10-team $200 entry, you'll play for a 2023 FFPC main event entry. So you can win $1 million next year and have it all paid for based on how you do in week 7 tonight. All right. So Josh, this is fascinating because I was looking at my lineups Tuesday morning after the Monday night game. And I tend not to, and this is on me. I tend not to look ahead to the bye weeks. And I should see who's going to be coming up on bye weeks, like not just this coming week, but maybe the week after. It floored me that we have the Bills, the Eagles, the Rams, and the Vikings. It's a plethora of fantasy goodness that people will not have the services of this week. Not to mention, the guys who are already hurt. I don't know how your lineups are looking, but I would put this right up there. And I think it's week 8. We have 6 teams on bye. Because of the quality of these 4 teams that are on bye, this might be the most devastating week to not only put in waivers, but set your lineups.
Yeah, I would agree with that. For the dynasty community out there, you can feel my pain. I did a startup this summer before the bye weeks were released. It was super flex. I took 3 quarterbacks, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, and Kirk Cousins. I have no quarterback this week. I am not kidding. In terms of actual fantasy and how to approach this week, one thing I think is very interesting for everyone that's playing DFS and just when you're setting your lineups and figuring out who to flex, the running back position looks really strong this week. There's a lot of very, very positive matchups. And at receiver, you basically lost your top 3. When I do my weekly rankings, they're free on the 33team.com. It's generally Cooper Kupp, Stephon Diggs, and Justin Jefferson are some combination of 1, 2, 3. We no longer have any of them. A.J. Brown is usually in the top 10. Devonta Smith is usually in the top 24. So Gabe Davis has now risen into the top 24. We are really strapped at the wide receiver position. Oh, you know what? We'll mention the ageless wonder, Adam Thielen. So what is that? That's 6 very high-quality players that are must-starts each week in pretty much every format that you will no longer have on your fantasy roster for today or for this week.
Let me kick things off here with a selfish question. And I noticed this when I was putting in all my waivers today. I obviously had to, for my Jalen Hurts teams, my Josh Allen teams, my Dallas Goedert teams, I had to pick up another quarterback or another tight end. And as a result, I had to drop somebody because I wasn't dropping Hurts or Allen or Goddard. One guy that came up, and he's been at the bottom of my rosters, and I've been keeping him around because I feel like if there's an injury to Justin Jefferson, if there's an injury to Adam Thielen, I feel like KJ Osborne could be like that, like in the FFPC where you have that second flex, right? he could be a guy who could be a flex or a second flex for fantasy owners. I did keep him on a few teams. I am planning on releasing him on a couple of teams. Is there anything worth, is there a good reason to keep Osborne at the end of your bench? Because to me, I can't deploy him unless Jefferson or Thielen gets hurt. If one of those guys were to get hurt, what are your prospects looking like for KJ Osborne, Josh?
So I would generally, in non-deep leagues, in non-shallow leagues, I would be keeping KJ Osborne. So what I like about Osborne, what I like about Tyler Boyd, and what I like about, I would put Josh Palmer in there. These are all receivers that you could put in your lineup if there's an injury to two different players. You know what? Josh Reynolds, same exact thing. If the wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2 gets hurt, you are most likely confidently starting that player. So I generally don't like having these middle of their career receivers on my teams because we kind of know what they are. The quote unquote upside is limited compared to one of these rookies or second year players. But I do think, at least with KJ Osborne, if there's an injury to Jefferson, if there's an injury to Thielen, we saw what happened last year. I think he would be every week viable. However, I will say one other thing. I generally don't buy too much into these rumors. I have seen that OBJ is being recruited to Minnesota. So I don't know if that means that they do not like KJ Osborne. I don't know if that means that, hey, if you can get OBJ on the cheap, I know he's frustrated with the Rams right now, that you should do it. But I would say that generally Osborne is the type of receiver that I would try and keep compared to most other veterans, just because we have two outs with him, both Jefferson and Thielen.
I want to, first of all, it's good analysis, and I'm happy for the teams I did keep them around. And the leagues I primarily play in the Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship, where you have to start 3 receivers every week. So receivers are at a premium there. You cut one of them loose, man, you might never get them back. So good analysis there. Let's shift it to quarterbacks. 2 quarterbacks making their returns this week. Dak Prescott has been medically cleared. He is going to start against Detroit. Tua Tagovailoa has been medically cleared. He is going to start. The Dolphins have Pittsburgh at home this week. And we obviously know that both of these players are guys you can feel pretty good about starting right away their first week back. But what about the skill position guys? Yeah, we know you're playing Waddle, you're playing Lamb, you're playing Tyreek Hill and all these guys. But what about the fringe guys? What about the Mike Gesicki's of the world? What about the Michael Gallups of the world? Dalton Schultz, these types of players, Josh. Now that we have Prescott and Tagovailoa back in the fold, and they're going to be slinging passes out there, are all these guys going to be playable in week 7 for you?
So I would say that the Cooper Rush to Dak Prescott transition, that's going to be a bigger transition in terms of fantasy repercussions than the Bridgewater Skylar Thompson to Tua transformation. I think Tua is better. I don't think he's as much of an upgrade as Dak is over Cooper Rush. And I think this is just very, very good news for Michael Gallup. Why would Cooper Rush and Michael Gallup have all that much chemistry at all? I don't really know. But Dak Prescott, Michael Gallup, they have played together for many seasons. And Gallup is only going to be getting healthier each week. And I actually have Dak as my QB4 on the week. I think that says 2 things. One, damn, this is a rough week for quarterback with Allen, Hurts, and company out of the fold. But I think that also speaks to Dak's, he finally has his weapons back. Detroit is one of the 2 or 3 least scary defenses. And I think that he kind of left a bad taste in people's mouth because he gets injured. He faces Tampa Bay, who we know at this point is a very, very good defense. He gives you under 10 fantasy points, but I think you just have to fight that PTSD. You insert him right into your lineup. He is my QB4. I think at worst you probably have him QB6 on this week. Detroit is just such a smash matchup. He has Lamb, he has Gallup. Noah Brown has looked good. Dalton Schultz was a full participant in practice this week. I'm confidently starting Gallup. I will less confidently, but still start Dalton Schultz, assuming that the practices stay full. And then the other guy you mentioned, Mike Gesicki. I don't have too much of a strong lean in terms of how Tua helps or doesn't help him. However, I think Mike Gesicki is an excellent bench stash or kind of a fringe top 12 option. I'll kind of explain what I like about Mike Gesicki. So we just talked about these receivers that have 2 outlets. KJ Osborne, 2 outlets. Jefferson injury, Thielen injury. Mike Gesicki could be a monster if Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle goes down, because whoever is next in line at receiver there, like the Cedric Wilson types, will be such a steep downgrade that you're just going to have to get Mike Gesicki more involved. He hasn't cracked a 16% target share yet in any game. but I would like to think he starts to hover around 20% if something were to happen to one of those two. The route participation has ticked up the past 2 weeks. So Gesicki for me, he's kind of a priority bench stash at tight end where I think I have him at like tight end 13, 14 this week. I wouldn't really be clamoring to start him in my 12 team leagues, but at the same time, like, let's be honest, like tight end 9 through tight end 15 is mostly a crapshoot in terms of range of outcomes. And would I confidently say that Mike Gesicki should not be started? No, he's just not going to be ranked in that way. So for me, I don't really think the Gesicki thing changes with Tua, but I do think he's a really interesting player to monitor who had just absolute crap route participation earlier in the year and is now starting to look like his old self again.
Josh, the running games for both these teams, I think of Elliott and Pollard, and obviously Mostert and Edmonds in Miami. Are there any significant changes with what you're doing with guys in the lineup, got those guys in your lineup this week based on the return of these quarterbacks, or is that just a negligible difference?
So I did boost Zeke and Pollard, especially Zeke. I have Zeke as a top 20 running back option this week. He has not cracked my top 20 yet this year. So congratulations to Mr. Elliott. I think Dak just raises the scoring floor and scoring ceiling of this Dallas team. The Lions are an absolute sieve when it comes to fantasy points from pretty much every single position. And Ezekiel Elliott's been getting quite a workload. Maybe some of that was due to Cooper Rush and protecting him, so they leaned a little more run heavy. But I think it's going to be more than made up for with the potential touchdown upside. So I think Zeke is going to be the biggest beneficiary as the primary goal line back on an offense that goes from essentially a backup quarterback to a Pro Bowl caliber quarterback in Dak Prescott.
Where do you stand on because I feel like the debate has been raging, Josh, for like 3 years, probably. Well, yeah, probably about 3 years now. Ezekiel Elliott versus Tony Pollard. I've had high stakes players tell me basically since I think 2019 that Pollard was the better guy there than Elliott, and why they're not giving him more touches, more carries. They didn't know. I feel like that debate has gotten stronger. There's some Elliott truthers out there, and there's definitely a lot of Pollard people that are just like, get him in the game, get him the ball over Elliott. He should be getting more touches than Elliott. He's the guy that's the more talented guy in the backfield. I don't know what the numbers say on this because I've never delved deep into it, but I assume you have delved at least deeper into it than I have. Where do you stand on Elliott versus Pollard?
So I have dug into the numbers. Pollard looks way better. If you look at targets per route, Pollard gets targeted on a much higher percentage of his routes. Ezekiel Elliott runs a lot of routes. I don't think people realize that he runs more routes than almost every other running back in the NFL. They just do not target him. I don't know if it's that he's very low on the totem pole for the quarterback's progression, or if he's just bad at running routes. I'm not as much of a film guy, so I can't speak to that. But in terms of the actual target percentage on his routes, it's very low. Yards per carry, a massive advantage to Pollard. Some of these like advanced stats that I'll look at, like yards created type metrics, where some film guru is going in there and saying, this is how many yards were blocked, this is how many yards the guy got. They always favor Pollard. Here's my stance on it. Who do I think is better? I think in a vacuum, Tony Pollard is better. The stats make it seem like Tony Pollard is so superior. And that part I disagree with for one reason. They are used differently. It would be shocking if they had the same yards per carry when Ezekiel Elliott is frequently running up the middle and Pollard is getting used more in space. So I think that's one thing that we have to factor in is that do I think Pollard is better? Yes. Do I think Pollard is like 50, 60% better? Absolutely not. If they switched roles, it wouldn't shock me if Zeke was actually more efficient. So I think the reason they do that is for two, the Zeke contract. And Pollard's a smaller back. I don't think Zeke is fine. I don't think they have any incentive to give Pollard 25 carries a game. He would probably get injured. So hopefully I answered all those questions there. So in a vacuum, Pollard over Zeke. Is it close? Yes, I think it is closer than the stats say.
And definitely closer than a lot of people out there think. So that good knowledge there. Something is kind of irritating me right now with the Chargers receivers. So good news for Keenan Allen, it seems. Now he was limited in today's practice. It sounds like he was going to be back. And then I saw a tweet, and I can't remember who put it out there. Some Chargers reporter asked him, you feel like you're going to be ready to go this week? And he said, well, I got to be smart about, I'm paraphrasing here. I got to be smart about this. If we got to take the long game, we got to take the long look at this and think of the entire season, then we will. Chargers on bye in week 8. Maybe he doesn't come back till week 9. Josh, what do you think is going to happen with Keenan Allen this week? Obviously, I know your rankings are out, but you will modify those if it looks like Allen is going to miss. The irritating part for me is not only is this a 425 game, but Josh Palmer didn't practice today because he had a concussion early in the Monday night game and then still played through the rest of the game. I shouldn't say he had it early in the Monday night game, but he did get his head slammed down early in the Monday night game and played through it. Now, the question here is, well, it's a bunch of questions, really. Obviously, you're playing Mike Williams. Obviously, you're playing Gerald Everett. But if you're waiting, I have a couple of teams where I have both Allen and Palmer, and I'm not sure what to do here because there's a non-zero chance that both of these guys miss this game.
So we'll start with Keenan Allen. I would be shocked if he plays. He's 30. They have the bye next week. This is not the most difficult game out there against the Seahawks. The Seahawks are better than we expected in some ways, but they're still the Seahawks. The Chargers are a far inferior team pretty much across the board. So I think Keenan Allen comes back week 9. They already tried to rush him back 2 weeks ago, and that's when he re-aggravated the hamstring injury. So to me, it just seems very logical. Let Keenan Allen get 2 more weeks of rest with week 7 and week 8. Josh Palmer, that really is a wait and see. I just have no read on it because we kind of have our old concussion priors in terms of how long these guys took to come back. And I feel like now with the Tua Tagovailoa situation, it is just completely a wrench has been thrown into it in terms of what the media thinks, what these teams think, if they think they're going to be judged, if they think there could be repercussions brought down by the league in terms of, oh, you were playing concussed players, or who even knows? I don't know. So I will keep Palmer in my rankings for now. If for some reason he is out, I think DeAndre Carter suddenly becomes an interesting flex play. In terms of Mike Williams, this is subject to change. I'm allowed to change my rankings. Everyone else is allowed to change their rankings. Today, Wednesday night, I have Mike Williams as my wide receiver 6 on the week. The33rdteam.com. You can see my rankings. They are free to view. I write up a lot of players of interest, and I wrote up Mike Williams. And I said that Mike Williams in every single game without Keenan Allen has at least 101 air yards. And when it comes to Seattle, a bottom 3 pass defense, I would put a very high probability that those air yards translate into receiving yards. I'm very bullish on Mike Williams this week. He's getting the downfield targets, and I just don't think Seattle is at all qualified to stop him.
Just a quick update for anybody who is following the ALCS. The hero from the 18th inning marathon, Jeremy Pena, Astros shortstop, just hit a homer. 4-1 now, Houston leading the Yankees in the bottom of the 7th in Houston. Now, Josh, do you get into baseball at all? Now, are you a Texas guy?
So I actually grew up in San Diego for the most part. I went to grad school in Texas, but I grew up in San Diego, so I'm a Padres fan and I'm a Chargers fan. I'm kind of like that like ex-boyfriend where the girl leaves him and he's just like, oh, babe, come back. I'm still loyal. That's kind of like me with the Chargers. I kind of swore them off. Again, I was like, Rivers, that was my quarterback. And then I watched Herbert's first start when he was snuck in there with the Tyrod Taylor lung catastrophe, that scandal. And he almost beat the Chiefs. And I said, oh, you know what? This guy's pretty interesting. I'm just going to be a desperate Chargers fan. Now I live in Denver, but still a Chargers fan. I cannot root for the Broncos. They're in the division. And it makes it a lot easier when Russell Wilson looks awful. The Broncos play calling looks awful. So I am a Chargers fan. I'm also a Padres fan. I used to work in baseball. I worked for the Tigers. I worked for the Padres, both of them in the analytics world. So I am fairly familiar and well-versed with baseball as well.
And you're obviously rooting hardcore for your Padres to get back to the World Series. First time in like 20-some years that they can get there.
Yeah, they haven't been to the World Series since '98. That is 24 years ago. That's not great.
No. Well, you could be a Brewers fan like me, and they haven't been there since '82. So it's one of those things. It's a matter of perspective. So you just mentioned Russell Wilson. We should bring this up. Is this a Nathaniel Hackett problem that's going on with the Denver offense? Is it a Russell Wilson problem? Is it an injury problem? Because I mean, of all the people I talked to in the preseason, even the people that were down on the Broncos offense saying, yeah, I'm not too sure about this. I don't know if it's going to work out. I can't recall a conversation where anybody predicted anything close to what's going on there right now. I'm flabbergasted by it. How shocked are you? And what's the issue there in Denver? How do they fix it?
Yeah, well, just first for some context. So if you watch that Monday night game, I think most people listening to this probably tuned in for at least part of it, and you went, oh, wow, this is an awful Broncos offense. They scored 16 points in that game. They were averaging 15 points per game coming in. So that was an improvement in terms of scoring. It is that bad. I'm going to put the blame on both Nathaniel Hackett and Russell Wilson. I think we would all agree the play calling is very suspect at times. There's been questionable clock management. It does not seem like they are catering their plays to Russell Wilson's skill set. And then I think on Russell Wilson's end, he also needs to adapt his game. I actually talked about this on a podcast earlier this week in terms of, I think Russell Wilson's an interesting case study because there hasn't really been a quarterback like him to this point. Short, highly mobile, incredible arm, deep ball thrower, very, very good out of structure, very, very average to maybe even below average targeting the middle of the field. The only other guy I can think of that you could say is in this Russell Wilson archetype would be Kyler Murray. The problem is Kyler Murray is in his early 20s. So we don't know what Kyler Murray's career arc looks like. Russ is kind of the first of his kind for this type of player. The only other short mobile quarterback that came to mind for me immediately was Michael Vick, but I think we would agree that that is just an awful comparison. I think it's much closer Russ, Kyler. So we just haven't really seen this type of quarterback age. And I think what we're learning is that the shorter quarterback who is much more limited than a pocket passer in terms of how they're going to age, this is not good for Russ. The decrease in athleticism, maybe a touch of a decrease in arm strength, his play style clearly is suffering from it.
I think you know, the moral of the story here is, and this again goes to a lot of people I've talked to, yourself included. I don't know if anybody foresees this thing getting better anytime soon for the remainder of the season. So if you can trade in your leagues, dynasty leagues, whatever, it might not be the worst idea in the world to sell, you know, some of those Broncos pieces for 80 cents. If you can get 80, 85 cents on the dollar, it might not be the worst idea in the world to do that, because I don't know how to fix it. I don't know nobody else who knows how to fix it. I know the Colts are trying to fix their running game right now, and hopefully the tonic that they need is getting Jonathan Taylor back this week. He practiced in full today. It looks like he's going to be a go. And just when we were starting to get to know Deion Jackson as well. Josh, any trepidation with starting Jonathan Taylor right away in against a pretty good Titans rush defense, his first game back?
Yeah, I'm looking at my rankings right now because I was a little bit concerned about Taylor. So I have him at RB13 right now. I think I can make the case to put him as high as like RB6, RB7. It is purely just we don't know what the ankle situation is. And the Titans are a difficult matchup. And Jonathan Taylor only has that one big game. He had the big week one. Very disappointing since then before the ankle sprain. So that is all going against Taylor. What is going for Taylor? I think there's two things. One of them, game script. I think it's going to be a close game. The Titans are not the type of team that is just going to blow another team out of the water with their pass attack. It's going to be close the whole time. I would be pretty surprised if Jonathan customary 20 plus carries. The other thing going for him is that the offensive line of the Colts is getting healthier, kind of coincided with Matt Ryan's potentially career best game, depending on what stats you look at. He had the most completions ever for his career. I think he had 42 completions.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a lot of pass attempts to begin with. That's how many completions he had. And it kind of coincided with the O-line getting a little bit healthier. So I think that's going in Taylor's favor. I would be more bullish on him if I knew that he was fully healthy. But at this point, it seems like he's still limited in practice. I think he's going to be fine. He's going to get his 20 touches. I'm just a little bit concerned about the explosiveness and ultimately the matchup.
Yeah, my mistake. He was a limited participant in practice today. And I think the other thing that isn't necessarily working against him, but obviously if Nyheim Hines can come back this week, you'd like to think that the Colts are going to work him in on a few more third downs. And Josh, I mean, can you really, if you're Frank Reich, just ignore now Deion Jackson? I mean, I feel like this is a guy that's earned himself a few carries, and maybe he carves a little bit of a role, not a big role while Taylor and Hines are healthy, but maybe a role in this passing offense that, or this rushing offense that takes maybe some touches away from Taylor and Hines.
I could see Deion Jackson having a role this week. However, one thing that history has shown me is for some reason, these coaches, no matter what they see from these backup running backs, they just put them right back in the can when everyone else is healthy. So I don't know why they would do it. If I were coach, Taylor would get 15 carries. Deion would get 5 to 10. We'd keep everybody healthy and in check. Come the playoffs, we would ride Taylor. But what do we know about these coaches? If it's a backup running back, it's going to be really, really tough. I mean, we see it with Pollard and Zeke. Pollard, year after year, has had better metrics. PFF has generally, like, everyone's kind of liked Pollard better, and yet Zeke is still there. And I think that's just generally how these running back rotations work. The coach has a guy they like, and it's very, very difficult for that guy to get unseated.
Speaking of running backs, let's head to running back start sit here. The first one off the board tonight, and we talked about Denver a little bit earlier, but Latavius Murray, who obviously got the lion's share of carries in that Monday night game. Sounds like Nathaniel Hackett has already announced Melvin Gordon to be the starter again this week, but again, take it for what you will. And it's just words. I mean, maybe it's something, maybe it's nothing. But Denver this week goes on the road, I believe. No, they're at home against the Jets. And then Green Bay, A.J. Dillon is on the road in our nation's capital taking on the Commanders. If you can only play one of those guys, is it Lat Murray or is it A.J. Dillon, Josh?
So I'm going to preface this with they're really close in my rankings. But when we're on the radio, we have to have strong takes. So as long as you can keep in the back of your mind that these guys are actually neck and neck, we are going with Latavius Murray. Melvin Gordon was the starter this past week, and we saw what happened. I just think Latavius Murray played really well. We know that this coaching staff has been frustrated with Melvin Gordon. They've been frustrated with the fumbles. And also, Latavius Murray just has the better matchup. It's not like the Jets are a great matchup. They are a fine matchup for running backs. But on the flip side, the Washington Commanders, they are a punchline. They are an awful team. They're in the running for the number 1 overall pick. But they have one really good thing going for them. They are an elite run defense. That does not bode well for the Jones-Dillon committee. And they're also a bad pass defense. It seems pretty obvious to me that after the frustrating loss in London against the Giants, after the incredibly embarrassing loss the next week against the Jets, the Packers are going to have to lean on Aaron Rodgers, especially when the matchup kind of suggests that they're going to be more pass heavy. I don't quite see how Dillon has a ceiling game in this one. I think the case for Murray is a little more obvious. He just does what he did last week when he took, I believe it was 15 of 19 running back carries. Who has the higher floor? A.J. Dillon. We know he's going to get some touches. It wouldn't shock me if Murray literally didn't touch the ball in this next game. This is the Broncos. I wouldn't be surprised if Gordon and Boone were splitting most of the work, but I think what's most likely is that Murray outproduces Dillon in a better matchup when it looks like he's probably going to get 15 to 20 touches, and Dillon's probably going to get closer to 10 to 15 against a tougher run defense.
Chase Claypool had his best game of the year this past week. Kind of came out of nowhere, too, when a lot of people had already made up in their minds that the Steelers have moved on from Claypool. It's going to be Pickett. It's going to be Pickens. Claypool, doing his best lead course, so not so fast, my friends. Gets 7 targets. He catches all of them for 96 yards. He gets in the end zone. Also had an 8-yard rush. Would you play him this week, Josh, if you were considering him on the road in Miami, or your other option was Corey Davis, who just, again, his Jets beat the Packers last week. They go to Denver in your backyard this week. Is it Corey Davis or is it Chase Claypool?
I have Corey Davis ranked ahead. I would lean Corey Davis slightly. He's kind of been the most consistent Jets receiver the last few weeks. This whole season, actually, he's been remarkably consistent. He's been putting up the yards. In terms of Chase Claypool, I think he's an interesting one because we're getting Trubisky most likely for this week after the Pickett concussion. And we kind of realized that Trubisky and Chase Claypool are not on the same page at all. There were no yards, there were no fantasy points when the two of them were playing together. But what's different now? He is the main receiver on this team that is on the trade block. I think they showcased him last week. They might showcase him again. Who has the higher ceiling? Claypool. If you're projected to lose your matchup, play Claypool. If you're within a few points of your projected matchup, I would lean Corey Davis, who I think just has a more guaranteed role in this offense where Claypool could potentially turn into a pumpkin once again in this matchup. But because he might get featured again, trade deadline, I think it's 2 weeks away. I think it's kind of like the Taysom Hill situation where it's like, hey, you're projected to lose your matchup by 15 points. Throw Taysom Hill in the tight end slot. Oh, you're projected to be about even. You probably want to avoid that donut, play somebody else. So I think that's how I compare. So we have Corey Davis can be like a TJ Hawkinson, and then Chase Claypool could be Taysom Hill.
Okay. See, now this is the analogies I'm looking for here
There
on
we
the
go.
show to put in the right frame of mind. I'm trying to figure this out. Speaking of Hawkinson's tight end position, Kyle Pitts. I don't know what to think about last week. Was very excited about the early touchdown, and then he only caught 2 more passes besides that. And then you have the flip side, Robert Tonyan, who had his best game in, I don't know, since 2020 maybe, 10 catches. Granted, for only 90 yards, but he was heavily involved in this passing game. I think there's certain people who had Kyle Pitts that maybe had picked up Robert Tonyan as insurance, maybe even started Robert Tonyan the last couple of weeks over Pitts. And now you have to look at this situation of who do I play at tight end now? Am I going with the guy I invested all this draft capital in as Kyle Pitts this week goes to Cincinnati, or Robert Tonyan in Washington, D.C. against the Commanders, Josh?
I think they're really close. I have Pitts ahead in my rankings, but they are both in that kind of like tight end 8 to tight end 15 range that we talked about earlier, where it's kind of a crapshoot, and that I'll have my nuanced reasons for ranking one over the other, but I can't really fault anyone who ranks those guys differently because I think it's all really, really close. So I lean Kyle Pitts because I just think Atlanta will actually have to throw against the Bengals. The Bengals are going to put up points. Their offense is looking better by the week. And I think part of the thing with Kyle Pitts is he scored the touchdown. They got up early, and a pretty weird game script that they ended up beating the Niners. I think it was 28-14. They won by 2 touchdowns.
Yeah.
Both Tyler Algier and Caleb Huntley crested 15 carries apiece. That's pretty crazy.
And to the other thing that I'll point that out in that game too is, and I don't think we have Jeff Wilson anywhere on the rundown tonight, but that's a dude too that people had high hopes, right, against Atlanta. 28 yards and a fumble, and then that was basically it, because then the Niners were throwing. It was just not something that I think a lot of people envisioned.
Yeah, I don't recall hearing any analysis last week that said Jeff Wilson's a fringe start because he might get game scripted out of that 49ers Falcons game.
Right.
So I think this week, though, the Bengals are going to put up points. I think the Falcons are going to have to throw eventually. I still just like the talent of Pitts. And with Tonyan, we kind of know what he is. Was this past week really, really fun? 12 targets, 10 catches, 90 yards? Yes, very, very fun. Did Randall Cobb get injured? He's going on IR? Yes, that opens up more targets. But we have a pretty long track record of Robert Tonyan being a 10 to 12% target share auxiliary piece that is touchdown or bust in this offense. Kyle Pitts has had, he basically consistently has, I think every game but one, he set a target share of at least 21%. And I do think the Falcons are going to have to throw in this game. They've gotten really, really lucky for a few of these weeks where somehow they're keeping the games pretty close. I think the Bengals are good enough on offense that they're really, really going to push them. Falcons allowing the second most passing yards to opposing quarterbacks. Oh, that sounds pretty good to me for Joe Burrow and the big three of Chase, Higgins, and Boyd. So I'm going to lean Pitts on this one.
You will lean Pitts, and we will lean into a break here, but don't go anywhere, ladies and gentlemen, because we do have the definitive Josh Larkey Thursday night football preview. It's the Saints, it's the Cardinals. We'll get into the return of DeAndre Hopkins, the launch of Robbie Anderson as an Arizona Cardinal, and that mess that the Saints have at receiver right now. We'll get into that, plus a few more start sits. He's Josh Larkey from the 33rd team. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC, and you're watching the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show right here on the Bettor Sports Network. We'll be back with our preview for Thursday Night Football in just 180 seconds. Don't go anywhere.
It's Moose and Keith with Mark Malusis and Keith Irizarry.
Moose and Keith with you. Let's welcome aboard right now, Iron Eagle.
One of the great stories that I have from doing notes on a plane, and you always get people looking over. They see color-coded uniform numbers, names, height, weight, age, background, hometown. And I had a woman sitting next to me on a flight, and I'm doing my notes, and she's kind of giving the look, then looking. And I can tell she's looking. And then finally, she'll say, so what is it that you do? Well, what do you think I do? She said, are you a wedding planner? I said, yes. I said, I have to put Rob Gronkowski at Tom Brady's table. I said, you know what? You're not correct, but it's the best answer I've ever heard.
That's great.
Corey Nando and Friends, presented by Mayo Media.
As far as fantasy life, fantasy executive, it's going to be a football life. The fantasy executive is probably going to be the best football life ever.
Who'll be the guest? Everyone who was on yesterday, basically.
Yeah, everybody that's on yesterday will be the guest. Scott Engel, you know what I'm saying? Adam Ronis. Yeah, everybody knows people. Because what Nando, obviously you'll be there. You know what I'm saying? We'll go to the GST and shoot some scenes. You know what I'm saying?
That'd be nice.
We'll shoot some scenes in Midtown Manhattan. Antonio Brown can be on my football life,
That'd
right?
be nice.
Because that's a big part of my come up as a fantasy analyst. Everybody, the football life, the fantasy executive is going to be for the people. When they do the football life on the fantasy executive, I'm going to be hands on.
Good. Yeah. You talking to you.
Lunch Money with Kyle and Ray, presented by FantasyGuru.com.
Cheetos or Doritos?
I truly love both. Cool Ranch Doritos.
Wow.
I grew up on Cheetos. I was a big Chester Cheetah guy.
Oh, nice.
But Ray, as I have aged into adulthood, I've moved away from the fun that is the Cheeto, and I've gone to the more cosmopolitan Cool Ranch Dorito chip. So I'm probably a Cool Ranch guy. How about you?
I would go Doritos. I don't like Cool Ranch. The traditional, original, regular, whatever it is really good. But my favorite's actually the sweet chili, the purple bag. Oh, it's delicious. It's fantastic.
Yeah. The one that sucks, and I think we can all agree on this one, taco.
Yeah.
I know a lot of things, and I'm perfect at a lot of things. My Dorito trivia is a little shaky.
Okay.
A little shaky. But I think taco is the first flavor.
We have an update from Houston, ladies and gentlemen. While you were away, we have an Anthony Rizzo. I believe it was an Anthony Rizzo solo shot. And the Yankees also got a base hit. I missed who the base hit was from, but they do have a runner on. Top of the eighth from Houston. Yankees trail the Astros 4-2 in game one of this best of seven ALCS. We have a best of one game tomorrow night. Horrible transition, I know, but it's Thursday Night Football. It's probably going to be a horrible game if history's any guide. We do have the Saints and Cardinals tomorrow, and I'm with Josh Larkey from the 33rd team. Follow him on Twitter at JLarkeyTweets. And by the way, I should mention this to you. I should have mentioned this at the top of the show. Download the Bettor Sports Network app right now in the App Store or Google Play, and that way you can be a part of our shows. You can call in, you can chat. You can enter contests just with the push of the button. Tell all your friends, download that Bettor Sports Network app right now. And it's free. It's completely free, and you can win a lot of stuff and participate in our shows and pick the brain of one Josh Larkey from the 33rd team. Saints and Cardinals. There's a few storylines here that I think are relevant for fantasy, Josh. And I think that the first thing I think of when I'm thinking about that Kyler Murray-led offense tomorrow is DeAndre Hopkins. There was a time in my drafts in the preseason where I was looking at potentially taking DeAndre Hopkins, and I was just like, you know what, I can't have a guy like that just sit the first 6 weeks on my bench, knowing that he's not going to be able to help me at all, and he's going to be a roster clogger. And then I look at how my teams are doing heading into week 7, and I might as well have drafted DeAndre Hopkins on a few of my teams because some of them are no bueno. Your thoughts on DeAndre Hopkins now that he is back for week 7 for fantasy owners? You trotting him out there right away and starting him? What are your thoughts here?
So first, let's talk a little draft strategy in terms of Hopkins, because I think it's interesting for future times that there is a suspension like this. I would take DeAndre Hopkins when I liked my draft through like 6 rounds, because he was often going at the 7th round, give or take, something like that. So I basically would be like, hey, do I like my draft? Is this a very good draft? If I thought it was, I'd get cocky and I'd take a player pretty early on that I knew was sitting for 6 weeks. If I did not like my draft as much or felt like I was really, really lacking some depth, I would not take DeAndre Hopkins, and I'd say, you know what, this team is really going to have to fight these first 6 weeks. So I think that's kind of a good thought experiment for this type of player. I'm pretty confident DeAndre Hopkins is going to be a full go. I believe he's around my wide receiver 15 range for this week.
Okay.
And I think it's because this wasn't an injury. He was suspended. It's one thing if he's coming back from injury and they're like, oh, yeah, he's going to be on a 20 route snap counter or something like that. But no, he could have played week 1. So I think he's going to be a full go. I don't really have too many concerns. Marshawn Lattimore has already been ruled out, so the star cornerback for the Saints will not be able to match up at all with Hopkins. I think that's good for Hopkins. Lattimore, a very physical corner. Hopkins, a physical receiver. And now we don't even have to worry about that. So I think you can pretty confidently pencil in a 20 to 25% target share in this game. I think he is going to be the target leader over Ertz. I'm pretty optimistic, at least for this matchup, with DeAndre Hopkins, with no Marquise Brown, and with a very, very green to Arizona Robbie Anderson.
Yeah, so let's talk about. I want to get into not only Robbie Anderson here, but the effect of DeAndre Hopkins now coming back with Rondale Moore. I mean, should we be of the belief that now that Marquise Brown is out, whatever we were doing with Rondale Moore with Marquise Brown in, we should be doing the same thing with now Hopkins out there opposite him? And then what are your expectations for Anderson specifically tomorrow night? We'll ask you that first, and then you can talk about what your expectations are for him down the road for the remainder of the season. But I can't really make a good argument for starting Anderson in any league on Thursday Night Football.
So in terms of what I expect from Hopkins replacing Brown on the outside, it might sound crazy, but I think if anything, there might be a couple more targets up for grabs for these other players. Marquise Brown was just an absolute target hog. He was getting double-digit targets every single game. I mean, Hopkins could walk into that. I would be inclined to think that in his first game back, he doesn't quite get there, which is fine. Marquise Brown was basically like a high-end wide receiver 1 prior to the injury, so it's not like we even need Hopkins to be exactly what Brown was. In terms of the Robbie Anderson thing, he's going to be on the outside. I would not start him. Do I think rest of season he's an interesting bench stash now? Yes. I dropped him in a couple leagues. I did not like what the Panthers offense was doing. You got week 1 out of him with his 100-yard game. Congrats. But at this point, it's a much, much better offensive environment. Marquise Brown's going to be out at least 4 weeks. It looks like it's more likely going to be 6. And I think with Robbie Anderson, he has kind of a history of being an 18 to 20% target share guy. And in this offense, that could be 7 targets a game, 6 targets a game, 8 targets some games. And the ADOT might be pretty high, which is tempting. For this game, though, it is a short week. He was just traded. It's Thursday Night Football. What do we think his route tree is going to be? Go routes? You're basically just crossing your fingers that they connect on some deep shot. In his first game ever playing with Kyler Murray, they might get 1 full practice in together, if that. I would expect 20 routes, some go routes, very, very limited. I will not be starting him anywhere.
And I think that, I mean, you're preaching to the choir here. It's not like I own him in a ton of spots, but in the spots I even in this week with bye weeks, it's really difficult to make a case for Robbie Anderson. On the flip side, the Saints, we know Michael Thomas, you mentioned Marshawn Lattimore is out. Michael Thomas is out. Jarvis Landry is out, but it looks like Chris Olave is in. So is this just wheels up for Olave this week? And I guess we should answer the question of, officially, I don't think we know. Dennis Allen, I don't think has announced the starting quarterback this week. But regardless if it's Dalton or Winston, you got to get Olave into all your starting lineups right away, right?
Yeah, I would hope it's Winston just because of the air it out attitude. But I think it's very similar for Olave. He was cooking with Dalton prior to his concussion in that game. I just love Chris Olave. I have him as a kind of a fringe wide receiver 1 type for this week because where are the targets going to go? We know the Cardinals are a really, really bad pass defense. If I remember correctly, I did this research earlier today. I want to say the Cardinals have allowed 18 pass plays of at least 20 yards this year. That is 3 per game, big plays. I think Chris Olave is just teed up to smash in this contest. I don't see how he doesn't hit double-digit targets outside of some strange game script. And I just think they're going to funnel the ball through him. It almost looks like he was going to play last week, so he's fully recovered from the concussion because he was practicing last week before they ruled him out. Again, maybe it's the Tua rule. It's kind of unwritten. Oh, now we have to be extra careful with concussions. So I think he's going to be a full go. I'm very, very optimistic about what he's going to do. Marquez Callaway and Traquan Smith have never been high target earners in their careers. Adam Troutman is out. Are we really thinking that Juwan Johnson, Marquez Callaway, Traquan Smith are going to take any work from Olave? This is the guy that's going to be open. This is the guy that I think has a really, really strong chance to put up 20 fantasy points in this one.
What about, I mean, and I'm with you, by the way, on Olave for sure. None of those guys are a threat to what he's going to do. However, knowing that there's no Landry, knowing that there's no Thomas, let's save Taysom Hill for a little bit. But Callaway, Traquan Smith, either of those two guys, would you be feeling all right about starting either of those guys as a flex this week? Or is it still just kind of too dicey and you want to stay away and go with somebody else? You may not have that option given the bye weeks this week, but would you look at either of those guys as not a desperation flex, but an all right flex play?
I would say Traquan Smith should not be started. You could make the case for Marquez Callaway as a desperation flex. I wouldn't go much farther beyond that. I really think this offense is just going to be funneled through Olave and Alvin Kamara in this one. Some gadget plays from Taysom Hill. I really don't think there's going to be much fantasy relevance outside of that. Maybe Juwan Johnson gets you 30 receiving yards if that's what you absolutely need. But I just don't really see a ceiling for anyone outside of Olave and Kamara in this one.
Even in an FFPC tight end premium format, Juwan Johnson, you would still mostly recommend on your bench, right?
Yes. And I think so Juwan Johnson, like he's getting some yards. The problem is the volume has been so low. So in FFPC, where you get the tight end premium, it's not like he's a Zach Ertz where he's just racking up these 7-yard receptions. Juwan Johnson, like his stat lines are like 2 for 30. The tight end premium doesn't really factor in all that much to this kind of stat line. It'd be one thing if he was getting like 6 catches for 30 yards. That is not what Juwan Johnson's been doing this year. So I really think in FFPC, he is the type of tight end that's going to be very, very minimally elevated by the tight end premium.
And I think, and as we get into some start sits here, I think another guy that's minimally elevated is a dude who plays tight end, but rarely catches the ball. It's mostly Taysom Hill throwing it or Taysom Hill rushing it. If you had the opportunity at tight end this week, let's say you're talking about starting Taysom Hill on Thursday night, and I believe he did, I think you said earlier too, Dalton Schultz got in a full practice today. Would you wait and start Dalton Schultz on Sunday against the Lions instead? How would you do this if those were your two tight end options this week, Hill or Schultz, Josh?
I would start Schultz. I think the only way that I would start Taysom Hill is if I'm projected to lose my matchup by like 15 points. Just because Taysom Hill has that weird upside where he can get you multiple touchdowns in a game the way that he's used around the goal line. I think if you told me one of these guys had 10 fantasy points, I would say Schultz. You said one of them had 15 fantasy points, I'd say Schultz. I think until we hit like 25 fantasy points, I would keep saying that's probably Schultz. So he's going to be my start unless for some reason you are just projected to be demolished in your matchup.
Now we talked about Dak Prescott a little bit earlier in the show, and I think you said he is your quarterback 4 this week, which is not only an indictment of how bad the Lions defense is, but how bad the top end quarterback options are this week.
Yes.
But if you were making the decision here, do you start Dak Prescott in his first game back, after the thumb injury, or would you go with Kyler Murray here on Thursday Night Football? I'm just kind of curious myself. The total in the Lions-Cowboys game is 49, which is one of the higher ones of the week.
Tomorrow's 44.
44. Okay. All right. So let's get into the philosophical part of this. When you're coming up with your rankings, do you look at the totals significantly when you're building that?
Yes, I do. So my rankings, what's included in my rankings is I actually post not just my rankings, I write up these players. So I have detailed player write-ups for context. Also, in the rankings, you get the matchup. You get that player's implied team total because I think it's important. Mm-hmm. I trust Vegas. Not unequivocally, but I do trust them. There's millions of dollars of research that goes into these game totals. If I were to throw it away, I'd be wasting millions of dollars of research. And then I'll have my expected fantasy points model that I rerun each week, just so people can understand kind of what the usage of these players has been. So there's not that much that goes in there. It's just essentially matchup, team total, and expected fantasy points model. I think the team total is very important. That is something that I do look at. And I think a good example would be Patrick Mahomes. Do I think Patrick Mahomes is a strong start this week? Obviously. I mean, we're wrecked by buys. It's Patrick Mahomes. However, the Kansas City Chiefs implied team total is the 7th highest of the week because they are at San Francisco. I think that matters. The Kansas City Chiefs are not the 7th best offense in the NFL. They're top 3, especially if you take out the Eagles and Bills, 2 of the other best offenses out there. I would say the Chiefs are the best offense playing in week 7. So how come their team total is 7th highest? I think that matters. It's because of the 49ers defense. So I really do factor this type of stuff in. I think it's important to just kind of be aware of the resources at hand. And that's just an incredible free resource to have these Vegas odds makers kind of in the back of your pocket.
Okay. So, knowing that, and I don't know how much it factors in for running backs here. We talked about Aaron Jones earlier. You're down on him, and quite frankly, who wouldn't be at this point? I live in Northeast Wisconsin, and I do a local terrestrial radio show here in the afternoons. And I got to tell you, people are restless, not understanding why Aaron Jones is not touching the ball more in this offense, even as a receiver, where he's been successful at it before. At this point, Josh, from a fantasy standpoint, sort of just washed my hands of it because this is 6 games in. I keep wanting things to happen. They haven't happened. Now, if I'm making the choice, let's say we'll know if James Conner is playing, hour and a half before game time tomorrow night. If he's not, would you start Eno Benjamin over Aaron Jones this week against, as you said, a very tough Commanders rush defense?
So I would start Eno, assuming James Conner is out. And what's nice is that we'll get to know that decision tomorrow night before we have to worry about Aaron Jones. So Aaron Jones, he has 1 game above 14.5 PPR points this year. 1 game. It was as big. I think it was like 32 points. He had the big explosion. He had the touchdowns. Outside of that, he's getting you like 5 to 13 fantasy points these weeks. That is not very exciting. Eno Benjamin, I do believe we saw his floor. I think he got you 9.5 fantasy points. What I like about Eno Benjamin is that he basically was just given the James Conner role. I happen to think Eno Benjamin is all else equal per touch better than James Conner. James Conner probably more durable in the long run because he's a much bigger back. Eno is only a shade over 200, but per touch, per game, I think Eno is just a very, very talented running back. He had 15 of 18 carries this past week. He ran 39 of the 44 running back routes. That is elite usage. The 9.5 fantasy points were from an inefficient day on the ground with no touchdowns. I think that's kind of the floor. Is you're getting 9-10 fantasy points. The ceiling is that you can get 25-30 fantasy points. He had around 30 receiving yards. He had several receptions. There's just a lot of ways where if he gets 1 or 2 touchdowns, he can be a real difference maker in this one. I would trust Eno. This is I just think it's a good spot for him where there's kind of flux with some of this receiving room. We know the role that he's going to get. It's just him and Keontae Ingram. Darrell Williams, if I remember correctly, he's already been ruled out. So it's literally just James Conner. There's nobody else in line that we have to worry about. And with Aaron Jones, he's got the tough matchup against the Commanders. And you might say, oh, it's okay. He's a pass catching back. I'm like, well, A.J. Dillon's actually out-targeted him a couple of these games. I believe he out-targeted him 6-4 last week.
Yes,
that's
correct.
That's off the top of my head. I'm trying not to look at too many notes. We just like to gut feel these at night. But yeah, Aaron Jones has not gotten the receiving role. So the Washington Commanders would be a certified bad matchup for how they've been using him this year.
One of the one player that I think we should touch on a little bit, and I don't necessarily think that Alvin Kamara is in the start-sit discussion. I mean, obviously in season long, if you have him, you're probably playing him. But from a DFS aspect, from an FFPC Weekly Challenge aspect, this is a dude who had 100 total yards in his first 2 games this season, 5 catches. He sits out because of the injury. I can't remember what injury it was, but he sits out. He comes back, and now he's got already in his last 2 games over 200 combined in those 2 games, over 200 rushing yards combined, and he's got 12 catches in those games after only catching 5 in the first 2 weeks. Has the real Alvin Kamara stood up here? Is this what we can expect? Sort of the lush bounty of fantasy goodness that we get from Kamara in full PPR leagues like the FFPC. Is this what we can expect going forward? Is this the real Kamara, Josh?
I think it is. I've been telling people for weeks now, you have to get him on your dynasty team, your redraft team, because people just, for some reason, assumed his season was over. I hadn't seen anything like it. Like you've got like a 4 or 5 year track record of this guy being awesome. He has a couple bad games. He's injured with a minor injury, and suddenly we just decided his season's over. The past 2 weeks, he is fully back. Over these past 2 games, he's averaging 52 snaps a game. That's a lot of time on the field. He's averaging 21 carries. This is not your mom's Alvin Kamara where he's getting 10 carries a game splitting work with a Mark Ingram. No. This is bell cow Alvin Kamara. 21 carries a game, 21 routes run per game, 7.5 targets per game, as you said, about 5 catches in each of those games. And over these past 2 weeks, he's averaging 159 total yards per game, which is good for 22 fantasy points per game over these past 2 weeks. I see nothing in his profile that suggests that the usage is going to start dwindling. The Saints are desperate. This is a team that had playoff aspirations. They have not been winning games. These next few weeks, every game is a must-win. They are going to ride Kamara. He has one of the 2 or 3 best roles in all of fantasy for running backs. He is my RB3 for this week.
Wow.
What are the running backs who get you 20 carries and 7-8 targets per game? There's not many. You might downgrade him a touch because of the offense, but pretty hard to root against Alvin Kamara's talent when you know he's going to be touching the ball 20 to 25 times per game.
It's pretty hard to root against that. It's also pretty hard to root against one of our favorite sponsors here at the Bettor Sports Network, and that's Jack Market. They offer live daily markets for sports that let you buy and sell shares of athletes in real time with other users, all for real money, and each share has a guaranteed payout at the end of the night. Go on the App Store, go in Google Play right now. Download the Jock Market, that's Jock MKT app. Use promo code Playbook. You'll receive 100% deposit match up to $100. Your first market is also going to be risk-free with losses refunded up to $100. Download the Jock Market app now using promo code Playbook. Hey, and don't forget, too, we're here for another hour. We get Josh Larkey's beautiful, gorgeous brain chock full of fantasy information for 60 more minutes tonight, ladies and gentlemen. When we come back to kick off hour number 2, the Chiefs have restructured Travis Kelce's contract. Does that mean Odell Beckham's coming to Kansas City? Is he going to Minnesota? Josh kind of poured cold water on that. Where is he going? Is he going anywhere? We're going to talk about that, talk about how to handle it for fantasy. Baltimore Ravens have a new receiver. His name is Deshaun Jackson. I'm convinced this guy is going to be running a 4.3 40 for the rest of his life, and he's always going to be in the market for a team. We'll talk about what he means in Baltimore. Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren. What are we doing with these guys? Not only from a redraft standpoint, from starting and sitting, what do you do from a dynasty standpoint with Najee Harris? I do want to get into that Las Vegas-Houston game, find out if this is going to be a big week for Derek Carr, plus all your starts and sits. This is the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Bettor Sports Network. He's Josh Larkey at JLarkey Tweets. I'm at Eric Balkman on Twitter from the FFPC. We will be back in 3 minutes with hour number 2. Don't go anywhere.
The Playbook with Fensty and Ronis, presented by FantasyAlarm.com.
The only person, I've said this to you before, who I believe back then, of all those power hitters who truly was clean, Ken Griffey Jr.
I mean, I think so when he got hurt. We'll never know that for sure either.
Nah, dude.
We've seen guys who were not big take substances.
That's true.
To get busted. So it's not about that always.
I hear you. It's just, don't you think with the way his career kind of went, you would think that he didn't take anything?
I don't think he did, but we'll never know 100%.
I'm going to keep telling myself that he didn't. The one pure player, I mean, he's my favorite baseball player of all time. In the 1990s, Ron, as a kid, as a 5-year-old kid who plays video games and collected cards, there was no one cooler than Ken Griffey Jr. I still wear my hat backwards because Ken Griffey Jr. did it and he looked really cool doing that, wearing a backwards baseball cap. Like, he made everything the guy did
looked cool. Even the home run in the movie Little Big League, it's acting, it's all, I guess, fake, but even he made that look cool. I mean, Ken Griffey Jr., you're a little bit older than me, but in the 90s, was there besides Michael Jordan, was there a more loved athlete than Ken Griffey Jr.?
Yeah, no, I love Griffey. He's one of my favorite players ever, from defensively to hitting his swing. And yeah, I would have loved to see what he could have done if he had stayed healthy, the final numbers he finished with. So no, I was a huge fan of Ken Griffey, and it's a shame though that all those injuries towards the end of his career just really limited the production he put up, but he still put up elite numbers. He was so fun to watch. So I'm a huge Ken Griffey guy.
And here's the other thing too. So 1994, the season got shortened because of the strike.
Yeah, he finished with 40 homers in 111 games that year, man. And then he had 56 2 years in a row, 97 and 98, and then 48. He had a stretch 4 years in a row, 49, 56, 56, 48, 40. I mean, unbelievable. And then, yeah, once he hit like 31, he started to miss games, 111, 70, 53, 83. So think about that, all those years that he lost, and he still hit 630 home runs, man. Yeah. So if he was clean, he would have been the all-time home run champion. Again, we're all guessing here, but you would think, all right, well, once he got into age 31, 32, that's when the body started breaking out, which is typical, right, for someone who's not using anything, whereas we saw Barry Bonds just get better with age, and we did not see that with Griffey. So look at 2001, where you're starting when he played on. Look at the home runs decline: 8, 13, 20, 35, 27, 30, 18, 15 to his age 38 season. Even age 39 in 170 games, he had 19 home runs. So he probably would have definitely been the all-time home run leader had he been able to stay healthy.
Better Sports Network. It's sports talk done better.
Only 59 minutes remain in your Wednesday. We are taking you all the way to the midnight hour here on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show, presented by the FFPC. I am Eric Balkman from the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, and of course, the Fantasy Football Players Championship. Being joined, co-hosting with me this week is at Jay Larkey Tweets, Josh Larkey from the 33rd team. Always a pleasure to have you on. Been a lot of great stuff so far, and I think we're going to get into some more good stuff as well coming up in this hour. We'll talk about Odell Beckham, Deshaun Jackson. We'll get into Najee Harris, Derek Carr this week. DeAndre Swift is going to be back this week. What does it mean not only for him and but also for Jamal Williams? We'll get into the Kyron Williams aspect too. I mean, everybody's always looking for the next guy up in every backfield. He could be the next guy up, although it won't be for a while in Los Angeles. And then we'll give you some fantasy sleepers. Josh will talk about a couple of his props. I know one prop I'm going to ask him about for sure. That will do it. And then Front Yard Fantasy will take it away at the top of the hour. But let's kick things off here in hour number 2. The Chiefs restructured Travis Kelce's contract today. I don't know necessarily what this means for the Chiefs in 2022. I don't know if this is a thing that they're trying to get ahead of something in 2023. But obviously, the first thing you think of is maybe this is a precursor to an Odell Beckham signing. Maybe this is a precursor to a Christian McCaffrey trade. Should we be reading into this? I mean, is there anything that we can do proactively right now as fantasy managers, Josh, that we look at this and say, okay, now that we know the Chiefs have done this, this is how we should be acting? Or is this something that we just don't know what's going on in Kansas City right now?
So I don't want to burst too many bubbles. If anything, they're going to fortify the defense. This is a top 3 offense in the NFL. You look at EPA per play, any of the advanced football metrics, this offense is elite. I don't quite know what they would do with Odell Beckham Jr. It is fun to speculate on him, McCaffrey, etc. This is a very, very complicated offense, the Andy Reid offense. I don't think they're just going to try and plug and play somebody in there necessarily when the offense is already really, really good. I think they're probably just going to add some really boring for us fantasy players defensive guy. So I hate to give the boring answer there, but this is what I expect. I would be very surprised if OBJ, CMC, anybody like that suddenly showed up in Kansas City.
Do you, I mean, I was bringing up this with my local co-host today. You know, back in the day, Josh, like, 10 years ago, but even 10 years ago or before that, the NFL trade deadline was nothing like the Major League Baseball trade deadline. the NHL trade deadline, the NBA. These were all real trade deadlines. The NFL, it just kind of seemed like maybe a special teamer or a linebacker here or there would get traded. There's nothing big. Then I don't know what happened, but a few years back, then all of a sudden big guys started getting, big names would start to get moved at the trade deadline, and it became a real thing again. As you look at, and I don't know how, far in depth you go into this or have looked at it, do you see any of the big name guys, and I'm speaking just for fantasy purposes, offensive players here, McCaffrey, any of these, DJ Moore is another one. Are any of these guys actually going to get moved?
I would lean towards none of these guys get moved. If we just look at history, there's just not that many big names that will actually get moved. So for each individual player, if you said yes, no, are they going to get moved? I would say no. Do I think one of these guys probably gets moved? Yes. But for each individual player, I would just be really, really hard pressed to say, hey, this is more than a 50-50 chance. It's probably more like a 20-80 or lower chance for all these guys individually. So I think the Panthers, obviously, they're just in full tank mode. I mean, we talked about them earlier. The Saints' record is so bad. We could see something funky there. Same with the Raiders, where another team that just totally whiffed on what they thought their window might be based on what their record is. So I think a couple of these teams could enter the market if they lose their next couple games. But I wouldn't really expect too many star players to actually be on the move for the trade deadline.
Josh, I happen to agree with you. I think you're right. I think you're dead on. But just in case you're wrong, and just in case somebody does let's specifically the Carolina Panthers situation, because as far as I can tell, this is the only team that could have two significant pieces moved. Maybe not both of them, but certainly it could be one or the other. It could be none. Is there a way? I mean, if we're trying to get ahead of the news right now, let's say McCaffrey does get moved, and you believe that to be the case. Is there value in picking up either Chuba Hubbard or Deontay Foreman right now? As a guy that, just in case McCaffrey gets moved, this would be the guy to own. And who would be the guy to grab between those two?
Yeah, so I think with these backup running backs, they're all quote unquote an injury away and yada yada. What's nice about Foreman and Hubbard is that not only could you say, oh, they might be an injury away, they could also be a trade away from being fantasy relevant. So that's why I think if you're doing these tiebreakers or these fringe backups on bad offenses, yes, Foreman, Chuba, those guys should be elevated. I would say Foreman's probably the guy. He has more of the track record. Chuba, they kind of made him the guy for a few weeks last year, and then immediately we're like, oh, no. What? we shouldn't. I actually, what was his name? Was it Rodney Smith? Was that who was
that? Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah.
They were random guys with like creative player names that were taking significant snaps from Chuba Hubbard. And then they brought in Deontay Foreman in the offseason. So it's clearly that they just didn't like him as the guy. So I would lean Foreman. He looked really, really, really good for the Titans last year. There were a couple of runs actually in the playoffs where I thought it was Henry and then realized that no, Foreman. Do you remember that? Like there was one big run last year in the Titans playoff game. And I was like, oh my God, Henry's back. And then I realized that was Deontay Foreman.
Yeah.
I was like, oh yeah, he looks pretty good.
It's crazy.
Well, I would lean Foreman, and I would just say that in general, if you're making tiebreakers with these bad offense backup running backs, lean Carolina because there is at least some chance McCaffrey's moved. And I have a landing spot for you. A fun
Okay.
one.
I want to hear it. Let's hear it. So it is not Kansas City, right?
That is correct.
Okay. Is it within the NFC? Is it within the conference?
It is in the NFC.
In the NFC, so somebody who needs a running back, obviously a contender that's willing. It wouldn't be Philadelphia, would it?
No. So I think the Rams are interesting. I'll explain why the Rams are interesting.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Sure.
I haven't looked too much at their cap situation. I assume it's awful, but this is a fantasy show.
I'm going to stop you right there, Josh. I don't think the Rams look too closely at their draft picks or their cap situation. I just think
that's a great point.
And they'll figure it out later. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
So here's what I like about McCaffrey there. We'll talk about Kyron Williams shortly. I don't think he's really the mega talent that could suddenly shift how the offense is run. But what do we know about the Rams right now? They are being hampered by their offensive line more than maybe any other team right now in the NFL. You might say, like, how is Tyler Higbee averaging 9 targets a game? I'll tell you. An average depth of target at 3 yards. He became the safety blanket.
Yeah.
They are so desperate for this safety option because they cannot protect Stafford that Tyler freaking Higbee was averaging 9 targets per game until he basically dropped off the face of the earth in week 6. If you put Christian McCaffrey in that offense, you give Stafford a reliable option. Suddenly, you cannot bring as much pressure because you have to defend McCaffrey. I think someone like that could actually fundamentally reshape their offense in the best way possible. He is one of the few running backs that I think truly, truly matters because of his pass game involvement, his instincts, the way that he's so dynamic in the open field. And I think he could truly change the Rams from one of the worst. I think they're 30, if I remember correctly, I think they're 31st in EPA per play this year as an offense. So if we're talking real football, this is a bottom of the barrel offense right now. But with McCaffrey, I mean, that would be pretty exciting. It would open up stuff for Allen Robinson because they can't bring as much pressure. Just so many ways this would change the whole offense.
What about the Cam Akers aspect here? Where does he go? Is he? I mean, I'm not cutting him off any of my teams. I want to see where he lands. But there's obviously a non-zero chance they just could outright release him. I don't think that happens, but certainly it's possible. What are you doing with Cam Akers on your squads, Josh?
I'm just holding him on the bench. It's depressing. I've got a question. Where would he have to go for you to get excited again about Cam Akers?
Well, and that's the thing.
I can't think of a team where I'm like, oh, there we go. Like that's the Akers I took in the 4th round of fantasy. Let's plug him back in every week. RB1, RB2 type. I don't know a place. Where would he go?
I think at this point, if you have Akers on your squad, you're just hoping he goes to a place where he can become a flex option, right? I think the whole Cam Akers as a back end top 12 guy or, front end, top 15, whatever it is, like, it's not realistic anymore this year. Now I just think you're trying to squeeze anything you can out of him. And whatever it is, it's great because I have zero expectations for Cam Akers right now. Okay. So the Beckham thing, have you picked him up anywhere? I own him. The only spots I own him are dynasty leagues right now. And I'm holding him right there.
So I have a better receiver to stash than OBJ. If you want a receiver that's injured for the next few weeks that I think has more upside, it would be Jameson Williams. We all love this Lions offense. He was many people's pre-draft, or I guess like pre-injury wide receiver 1 in that class.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you want an injury wide receiver stash, that's who you should prioritize.
And he should be back before Beckham, it sounds. I mean, I heard reports that it might be December now for Beckham. And here's the other thing to keep in mind about Beckham for 2022. It's like, okay, so this dude's rehabbing from an ACL, right? A Super Bowl ACL, right? So he's already behind the 8 ball there. Then he doesn't have a team right now. So he hasn't been working in a team facility, doesn't have a playbook, not working in whatever offense he's going to be doing. Or knows who his OC or his head coach is, or even who his quarterback is. That's 2. And number 3, there's going to be some sort of ramp up process for him to get on the field. And then once that happens, then you have to develop chemistry. Josh, we're running out of time in the season for him to accomplish all these things. I think for Beckham this year, the best thing you can do is pick him up again in a dynasty league. I have no reason to pick up a guy like that where I'm going to sit and wait and he's clogging my roster throughout the bye week gauntlet. If somebody goes down, I'm going to be like, oh, I can't cut Beckham. Think about what he could be. I don't think he's going to be anything in 2022.
Well, yeah, I think whatever team picks him up, it's going to be for the playoffs. When I say playoffs, I don't mean fantasy playoffs. I mean NFL playoffs. Because like you said, the timetable is really warped. Jameson Williams, what I've read is that they're still targeting around a Thanksgiving, give or take, return date, which would give you several weeks to use him, and you could use him in the fantasy playoffs. OBJ, not so much. He's probably returning in the fantasy playoffs. We have no idea what the role is going to be. He's probably on some type of snap count. And I just struggle to even think of that many contenders where he, like the only place where he could walk in and maybe be the target leader from day 1 per snap is Green Bay. But that's not really the type of move that they've ever made. So it's like Cam Akers where I'm like, all right, let's just look at all 32 teams and figure out where he's going. I don't really know where OBJ goes, where it's like, oh, now he's getting 8 targets a game in the fantasy playoffs. I think it really is. This is a guy that is for the NFL playoff push.
All right. So in Baltimore this week, the report that I saw today, and I'm looking up just to verify, Rashad Bateman. I don't know if it was full or if it was limited, but I know he practiced today, which is good for Bateman, for the people who own Bateman in their leagues. Devin Duvernay, it's been fun. It's hard for me to see he's going to get a big target share now with Bateman and Andrews out there. And now they also signed Deshaun Jackson. Deshaun Jackson, famously for me, I have always avoided him unless it was even when he was in his prime. You know, he had those 2 really good years where 2 or 3 really good years where he was an awesome, second wide receiver, top 15 guy or whatever. But outside of that, he's always been a deep threat, best ball guy for me, and I never was really that excited about drafting him. Should we be excited about picking him up? Would you toss a few dollars out of your $1,000 bidding budget? The FFPC waiver deadline just hit 15 minutes ago. Would you toss a few dollars at Deshaun Jackson just to see what happens? Or are we just, is he fool's gold? Is he the type of guy that, it's Baltimore, it's a receiver. Historically, there hasn't been a whole lot of value there. What are you doing with Deshaun Jackson, Josh?
I'm leaving him on waivers. I think there's so many things that need to line up for him. He hasn't been fantasy relevant in years. This is the Ravens, like you said. I mean, you probably the only time I could ever imagine actually starting Deshaun Jackson and expecting volume in that week would be if Bateman and Andrews were injured. And even then, I think there's a good chance Duvernay would still see more targets than him. This is a real football move. They want another field stretcher, another element to their offense. This is not someone that I think in any way is going to be fantasy relevant. I think he's basically just a desperation DFS play or a showdown play next time they have a primetime game if Jackson suits up. I think that's all it is.
Sticking in the same division, Najee Harris. And I know I talked with Howard Bender about this a little bit last week on the show, but your thoughts on Mike Tomlin saying he wants to get Jaylen Warren more involved, knowing that Najee Harris for the second straight year has been a pretty inefficient running back, and he's been a volume-based guy. If that volume goes away, all of a sudden it's very difficult to trot Harris out there as a top 12 option. And is it going to get to the point, Josh, where Warren is taking away a significant part of those touches in the backfield where you have to start thinking about, am I even going to start Najee Harris if this develops into a full-blown RBBC?
I think you're going to still start Najee Harris. It's kind of the state of the running back position. And I would just be really surprised if Warren gets much more work than this. Kind of what we're seeing right now is sort of a typical starting running back, backup running back dynamic. What happened last year was not typical. That was an early 2000s. We have the ultimate bell cow who gets literally every touch type workload. And now we're just kind of saying hey, he's the starter. I think he's going to stay the starter. I don't really think it morphs into some 1A, 1B, DeAndre Swift, Jamal Williams type thing. So I think Najee Harris is safe in terms of the role. I don't think is really going to get much worse than it already is. Warren's already there. In terms of fantasy, you just have to start him, but you have to temper expectations. You'd have to have gone really, really robust RB or just nailed so many waiver wire picks to not have to start him. But I'll let you know what worries me in terms of Najee Harris. And I think this is more of a dynasty take because we already know redraft he's cooked. He has between 6.5 and 15 fantasy points in every game this year. That you're not winning a week because of Najee Harris, and he's only getting older. So in dynasty, I'm pretty terrified that you're just going to have this guy who's it's almost like we accelerated to late career Zeke for Najee Harris in the blink of an eye. All of a sudden, it's year 2 for Najee Harris, and we're I look at him kind of like late 20s Ezekiel Elliott. It's crazy to think about. So I think in redraft, you're just stuck with a guy. I want to say he's my RB25. We're pulling it up live right now. Nailed it. He is my RB25 this week. I think he's going to be in that range every week. Kind of the fringe RB2, RB3, where it's very unlikely that you actually have 2-3 better options, and that he's not at least getting flexed in your lineup. But we're going to just have to temper expectations. It's a bad offensive line. He is not explosive. Bad quarterback play.
What do you do in dynasty leagues with Najee Harris?
So I think he's someone where I would try and get some type of package of intriguing assets. I just don't really think he's going to win you your league over the next couple of years. It's going to be 25.5 at some point next year. He's already getting up there in age.
Yeah.
I would try and get a 2024 first and then a fun rookie type player from this year or something like that. I think if you could get he's taking a hit because he has to play that. If you get Jamison Williams and some type of 2024 first that type of deal, I would do in a heartbeat for Najee Harris.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So like
So
something like that.
So a 2024 first, not a 2023?
I don't think you can get the 2023 first at
Okay.
this point.
All right. Got it. Okay.
I could be wrong, but I would be pretty surprised if, because why would you give up a 2023 first? So if let's say you're contending and it's a bad 2023 first, you don't need Najee Harris. You're contending.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say you're rebuilding and you're going to have a really, really high 2023 first. Well, you're not going to trade away your high pick. And if you're rebuilding, you don't want this like suddenly aging running back. He just doesn't really fit in with anybody's timeline. And I think that's why it would be really hard to milk the 2023 first out of another fantasy owner, is because he doesn't fit any timeline. He is just incredibly average. He's probably going to be like that for the next couple of years, getting you 12 fantasy points a game. Not exciting.
Not exciting at all. And now one of the games that I think is exciting this week is, and we haven't really talked about it yet at all. Raiders, Texans. The Raiders coming off the bye. Devontae Adams still not suspended. Maybe he won't. I mean, still not even penalized or fined or anything for the Raiders right now after his actions on Monday Night Football in Week 5. Darren Waller did not practice today. I think there's a non-zero chance that he misses this week. We'll have to see how his practice goes on Thursday and Friday and so on and so forth. But I know you're high on Josh Jacobs this week. What about Derek Carr? With Hunter Renfrow back, with obviously Matt Collins turning back the hands of time and looking really good in that offense. Is Derek Carr going to shred against Houston this week, Josh?
I think he'll be fine. Houston's not a great pass defense. However, the real matchup advantage here is in the run game. So if we look at Football Outsiders DVOA, a great metric, you'll see that the Houston Texans are exactly in the middle. They're the 16th ranked defense against the pass, but they are 4th worst against the run. That is really where Houston has been getting gashed. I have this expected fantasy points model. I basically just look at usage in terms of carries, targets, red zone, goal line work. Josh Jacobs is 5th in the NFL among running backs in expected fantasy points. And he's actually poured in the fantasy points as well. He's had at least 30 fantasy points in each of his past 2 games. I think he's going to be an absolute monster against the Texans. And I think their game plan will probably be run first in this one. And that if that's working, great. We don't even need to open up the playbook too much more than that. They already turned down Josh Jacobs' 5th-year option. What are they saving him for?
Right.
So I think it's for sure a Josh Jacobs game. He is my RB5 on the week. I believe Derek Carr, I have him like QB 10 or QB 11. That's just kind of, hey, like if you're in a 12-team league, you should start him. But
right.
I'm not enthusiastic about it. I think he's going to get you at least 15 fantasy points. I don't really know if he's going to be able to get you more than about 25 based on this matchup. Tough to see Houston keeping it competitive enough in most of these situations. So, yeah, I would say for sure Josh Jacobs, and then you'd be hard-pressed to have a better quarterback on your roster in a 12-team league than Carr. But I wouldn't say he's in any way this priority start.
Okay. We talked about Josh Jacobs just now. What about Zamir White going forward, especially in Dynasty? And maybe if you expand this conversation, because I thought there was several running backs in the draft this year. Zamir White to the Raiders, Rachaad White to the Buccaneers, James Cook to the Bills. And I felt like over the last few years, unless you're basically the first or second running back off the board, you sort of got to wait your turn to be relevant in fantasy. So I took a lot of these guys in the second round or late first in some cases. Are any of these guys, and I guess let's zero it in on Zamir White, knowing that Josh Jacobs is probably donezo in Las Vegas after this year. Is Zamir White going to be just part of a committee, or could he be the guy, a 3-down back for Josh McDaniels next year?
He's probably a committee back. He was taken in the 4th round. That's pretty mediocre draft capital. We saw Michael Carter, 4th-round rookie, look awesome. So they replaced him with Breece Hall. That's just kind of what happens. It's why I'm still nervous about Dameon Pierce in Dynasty, even though he looks great. It's like, well, pretty awful track record with these day 3 picks. You really have to beat the odds. So I think with Zamir White, I don't think he can be a 3-down back. He is not a pass catcher. He never did it in college. I don't even think he ever hit even 10 receptions in a college season. He was always in the single digits, if I remember correctly. So I think what you're looking at is probably a 2-down grinder. it's Derek Carr. It's always going to be a fine enough offense. They'll have Devontae Adams for quite a while. They'll have Waller for a while, Renfro for a while, all these guys. So a two-down grinder in a pretty good offense will have fantasy value. I don't think he's ever going to have the Josh Jacobs type of fantasy value just because of the lack of pass catching. I think Zamir White's a hold. Could easily see him getting replaced in the draft. I think what's most likely is they probably just draft some kind of pass catching specialist and then committee both of them. And that maybe Zamir White, if the offense is good, is starting every single week as kind of an RB2 type. But I think the 3-down role, I'd be very, very surprised if that happened.
Okay. Is there anybody outside of Ken Walker and Breece Hall from this past year's NFL draft that you would be looking at maybe as a 3? And I know it's asking a lot of these rookies, but a 3-down role right away in their sophomore year?
I think Damian.
I mean, like Rashad White. I mean, I don't know what Leonard Fournette's contract is, but I think
Fournette's uncuttable next year as well.
Oh, okay.
So if I remember correctly, it's a 3-year deal, but the way the money was set up is it was basically a 2-year deal.
Got it. Okay.
So if something happens to Fournette, Rashad White is just an absolute beast. I think he's a top 3 plug and play running back anytime Fournette is out. Just with what we've seen with these Tom Brady running backs in Tampa, where it's just check down after check down after check down and a lot of goal line carries. But I think Dameon Pierce still has the shot at it. Just because his path is easy, they don't draft a guy. Do I think it's likely that there's someone that gets drafted in some way or something like that? Yeah, probably because of history. But Pierce has looked good, and we basically just needed that one thing to go right, which is if they don't add too much competition, we already know that he can do it because he's currently doing it. So I'd say it's him and Rashad White, and that's about it. It was a shallow running back class.
Yeah, it was. It definitely was. And obviously we're excluding Hall and Walker because of their draft capital and the fact that they are pretty much borderline 3-down backs right now. Brandon Ayuk or Curtis Samuel is our next start sit this week that I want to get into right now. Brandon Ayuk is taking on the Chiefs at home. And then you're looking at Curtis Samuel, who is taking on the Green Bay Packers in Washington, D.C. You can only play one of them this week, Josh Larkey. Who are you playing?
So if Jahan Dotson doesn't play, I think I'd still lean Curtis Samuel a little bit. They're just manufacturing him touches. They're going to want, with Taylor Heineke, to get him in a groove. They're going to want to give him easy plays. I think that sets up well for Samuel. Ayuk, yeah, he's the higher upside one where there's the potential shootout with Kansas City. He just came off a big game, his biggest of the year. I think this is we could just go back to what was it, Taysom Hill and Kyle Pitts, or like a lot of the other dichotomies where it's like, do you want the guy that's got the really low floor but the high ceiling, or the guy that's more likely going to get you 10 to 15 fantasy points? Mm-hmm. I think if you're really, really down in your matchup, yeah, you could go nuclear against the Chiefs if something happens and it breaks right. I don't really see Curtis Samuel with Taylor Heineke getting you 25 fantasy points. But I think Curtis Samuel with his ADOT of like 2-3 yards in most of these games, I think that's who Heineke is going to have to rely on in many ways in this matchup against Green Bay. So I would lean in most circumstances Samuel, but Ayuk for the upside.
I know we talked about Mike Gesicki if Hill or Waddle got hurt earlier in the show, but they are not hurt, or at least they should be playing. Waddle might be playing hurt going into this matchup against the Pittsburgh Steelers at home. But Mike Gesicki, is he the better start than Hunter Henry this week? Hunter Henry going on Monday Night Football at home against the Chicago Bears.
Yeah, I would start Gesicki. He's facing the Steelers.
Even after Henry had that big week 6. Big week 6.
Yeah, his week was pretty big. We also saw Bailey Zappi throw for 300 yards. Do I think that's going to happen ever again? That's probably Bailey Zappi's only 300-yard game of his career. Let's be honest. So I think with Hunter Henry, like we saw Jonnu Smith get back into the fold. There's just a lot of guys in New England that are all going to do something. It seems like Jacoby Myers is really the only consistent one each week in that passing game. There's just a lot that needs to go right. It's also Chicago, a terrible run defense. They're playing at home. Damian Harris still has a chance to suit up for this one. They're just going to run the ball over and over again against the Bears. You don't need Bailey Zappi to throw for 300 yards again. Let him take a week off. Let him relax. I just don't really see the logic behind Hunter Henry. I think with Mike Gesicki, the Dolphins have dropped 3 straight after starting 3-0. They're gonna want to pummel the Steelers. They get Tua back. I think it's gonna be a very pass heavy game plan. So I would roll with Gesicki here.
And that's the other thing too, is like we can't be prisoners of the moment. Just because Hunter Henry had this big week 6 doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to have a big week 7. And you alluded to it. Bailey Zappi had a career game. Is that going to happen again this week? Non-zero chance of it, but probably not. Quarterback Marcus Mariota at the Cincinnati Bengals. We talked about this game briefly earlier when we were talking about Kyle Pitts. But Russell Wilson, who is going up against the New York Jets in Denver. I can't believe I'm asking this here in 2022, just seemingly a few weeks into Russell Wilson's tenure as a Denver Broncos quarterback. But here we are talking about Mariota or Russell Wilson. I am not a strong man, Josh. I am not strong enough to start Mariota over Wilson, but perhaps that's the wrong play. And I should be starting Mariota over Wilson. What are you doing?
Eric, it sounds crazy. I am strong enough to start Mariota over Russell Wilson because Mariota is healthy. He has been running. The weaponry is decent. Like we talked about earlier on the show, I do think they are going to trail against the Bengals, and Mariota is going to have to actually push the pace a little bit, get some fantasy points. Russell Wilson also has this hamstring injury. I'm sick of Russell Wilson and all these stupid interviews that he does, his dumb Subway commercials. He had a nice quote earlier I think it was earlier this morning. He was like, "Oh, Pete Carroll said, or not Pete Carroll. Nathaniel Hackett said my injury was day-to-day hamstring." Well, I think he said, like, I am Wolverine. I recover faster than that. Every medical expert that I looked at when they were commenting on this said, hey, a hamstring does not, like, if he has a legitimate hamstring injury, which it seems like he does, that just like physically cannot just go away within a week if it's a real hamstring strain. So do I think he plays? Yes, because it's Russell Wilson. The guy's a freak. Do I think he's limited and hobbled and probably has a bad game against a surprisingly decent Jets defense? Yes. I would definitely lean Mariota, floor, ceiling, everything for week 7, as crazy as that sounds.
And I'll tell you this, and we talked about the totals earlier, 47.5 in that Falcons Bengals game. 38.5 is what I'm seeing right now in the Broncos Jets.
God.
So yeah, it's not great. And it's certainly not going to be great for Wilson. We are late for a break. I want to take our last break of the show right now. Don't go anywhere because we still have yet to discuss the return of DeAndre Swift. We have to talk about Melvin Gordon. We'll touch on Kyron Williams. I know I've been teasing it seemingly for an hour. We will get to it. And then I want to get into Josh's rankings at the33rdteam.com, which you can check out for free right now. There's some interesting players on there where he has them ranked, and he's going to tell you all about them, plus a little bit of props and one final session of start or sit. 3 minutes. That's all we're going to be gone. We'll be right back. It's the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Bettor Sports Network.
Corey, Nando, and Friends, presented by Mayo Media on Bettor Sports Network.
I'm convinced Babe Ruth is a fictional character. Babe Ruth is not real. No, it's not. Babe Ruth is not real. We've been hoodwinked. We've been bamboozled. We've been led astray. We've been run amok. Ruth. I don't know the rest. Babe Ruth is a fictional character. I'm dead serious. Babe Ruth is a fictional character. Y'all are never going to get me to believe that Babe Ruth is real. Babe Ruth is like a baseball Santa Claus. I'm not buying it. After I saw those highlights last night of Babe Ruth, I'm like, there's no way you can tell me that Babe Ruth is a real person. Who do you know? There is nobody under the sound of my voice that has ever seen Babe Ruth play. I asked my pop, you ever seen Babe Ruth play? He's like, no. Nobody's ever seen Babe Ruth play.
Come on.
I'm telling you, Babe Ruth is a fictional character. Even Babe Ruth baseball cards, it looked like it's drawn. Like, Babe Ruth is not real. Y'all trying to pull a fast one. Listen, I don't know who made this up. Maybe it was Phil Rizzuto. Maybe it's the Lenny Melnick. But Babe Ruth is not a real person. There's no way. Everything about Babe Ruth is sketchy. If you didn't go to the games, how do you know that it really happened? Or I listened on the radio. You listen to Ovaltine on the radio. That old school radio was all fiction. Everything on old school radio was fake. But you think Babe Ruth is real?
Look, he lived until 1948. So if you find someone who's like 85 years old, they might have remembered him when he was little, when they were a little teenager.
Babe Ruth was made up by baseball purists. I am certain.
You do that thing where you pause the Babe Ruth video, and you zoom in, and you zoom in, and you zoom in, and you see like some artist's autograph, like right here.
Yeah, you like
some digital mark right here. Yeah.
Somebody need to investigate this and see if Babe Ruth is a real person. I'm pretty sure Babe Ruth is a fictional character created to make people think that like there was this great jolly old baseball player that drank beers and ate hot dogs and hit 60 home runs. Like the home run record before Babe Ruth was like 14. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, and
but
now
he figured it out. You know, like who figured out the dunk, right? Like he's just like, oh,
that's like Dr. J or something like. Then Dr. J, probably was before Dr. J, but Dr. J made the dunk famous. Babe Ruth made the home run famous, or maybe that was a way to get people to like. We're gonna make baseball America's pastime, but in order to do so, we need somebody who we can make the face of the sport. And they didn't have no face of the sport. So they're like, okay, let's make him a fictional guy that played for the Red Sox and was traded to the Yankees for like tickets to tickets to cats. You know what I'm saying? Like the Red Sox get a Yankees.
You tried to say Les
There's is there any footage of Babe Ruth in the Red Sox uniform? None. I'm telling you, Babe Ruth is a fictional character.
One last segment here on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show before we bid you adieu and let Front Yard Fantasy take over, ladies and gentlemen. I do want to remind you, too, that just like us and Front Yard Fantasy, we are not the only shows here on the Bettor Sports Network. You know, you think about Moose and Keith with Mark Malusis and Keith Irizarry, the Lunch Money Show, which I love, with Kyle Elfrink and Ray Flowers. That's presented by FantasyGuru.com. Mayo Media brings you Corey Nando and friends. Obviously, the Playbook with Fensty and Bronis, presented by FantasyAlarm.com. Bettor Sports Live with Rick Kamla. And, of course, in addition to our show, you have the weekly shows with Lisa Ann, the Dynasty Nerds, Campus to Canton, Dr. Roto, and more. You get college football Saturday mornings, NFL game day coverage on Sunday, beginning all the way at 9 a.m. in the morning and continuing throughout the day with Bettor Zone. Be a part of our community. Enjoy live commercial-free content wherever you go on the Bettor Sports Network app, streaming live on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, and bettorsports.com. You can see clips of our best moments and interviews on Twitter and Instagram at Bettor Network, and on YouTube by searching Bettor Sports Network. Plus, BSN now on TikTok with exclusive content at Bettor Network. Josh Larkey is going to be on one of these clips because it's been nothing but great analysis from him tonight. You already follow him on Twitter at JLarkeyTweets. If you don't, you're doing it wrong. And you check him out at the33rdteam.com. We're going to get into your rankings here in a little bit. Before we get into that, DeAndre Swift, sounds like he wants to play Sunday. Sounds like the Lions are willing to let him play on Sunday. The Detroit Lions this week take on the Dallas Cowboys in what could be a pretty fruitful fantasy game when you look at the total on that. I think we touched on it earlier when we were talking about Prescott, but the total on that, 49, is what I'm seeing right now. DeAndre Swift, if he's active, you got to play him, Josh, right?
Yeah, I think he's kind of an RB1, RB2 kind of fringe. I think you could rank him anywhere from like RB10 to RB15 this week. The Dallas Cowboys are a very good pass defense. They're actually pretty middle of the road when it comes to run defense. I think that bodes well for DeAndre Swift and his explosive runs. And yes, they're a good pass defense, but that doesn't really affect the running back that much. He can still get his checkdowns. I'm not quite sure what the role is going to be in his first game back, but we've already seen what he can do a la week 2 of this year. You give him 10 touches, he can still finish as an RB1. I think he probably gets 12 to 15 touches in this game, several in the passing game. He's probably going to get you 80 yards, always a threat to score. You just have to play him. I wouldn't imagine a roster where you're not starting him this week. So I think he's a very strong start against what some would consider a formidable defense in Dallas.
Melvin Gordon, we touched on earlier. Are you advising your subscribers, your readers, your listeners, your viewers to search every single nook and cranny for a better running back than Melvin Gordon, despite Hackett saying he is the starter? Is this a player that it looks tempting to start him, but you should be looking elsewhere because of the uncertainty in that backfield? It's probably one of the most uncertain backfields in the NFL right now.
Yeah, I'm not ranking him this week. So I generally rank players that I think you should start. I have 41 running backs ranked. I didn't rank Melvin Gordon. I think the upside is very minimal, and the downside is that this past week on Monday that he just doesn't play. So I'm pretty concerned. It's not like the Jets are some phenomenal matchup anyway for running backs as it is. So unless there's some, I actually really don't know, because he was announced as the starter. I'm still like, what? Yeah, sure. He was announced as the starter last week and he didn't play. So I think Melvin Gordon's someone where I just don't quite see the upside case. And I think there's a very, very good chance the guy gets 2 or 3 touches. And you're just kicking yourself for wasting a running back slot on him this week.
I know you said it before. Remind me, where do you have Latavius Murray ranked this? Because I know he's on your rankings. I think I want to say he's somewhere in the 30s. I could be wrong on that though. And then when you check that, Mike Boone, do you have him ranked at all?
I didn't rank Mike Boone. I didn't think he quite cracked the top. What I have, top 41. So I have Latavius Murray at RB27. I'll give you the few names around him. I think it'll make sense. So as we mentioned earlier, we have Najee Harris, RB25. David Montgomery, RB26. Yeah, I'm a little spooked. Matt Eberflus saying we're going to ride the hot hand. I don't know if David Montgomery is a hot hand kind of running back when Khalil Herbert's there. So 26. Latavius Murray, RB27. Jeff Wilson, whose role has been decreasing over the last few weeks, RB28. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, RB29, as Pacheco and McKinnon keep taking a lot of work and the touchdown regression has hit hard. And then at RB30, we have Brian Robinson. So I think that is the general range of Latavius Murray. If for some reason he happened to be announced the starter, I think he'd probably start to creep into RB20-ish range as someone that's going to see close to 20 carries again. So he's kind of a wait and see. But I just have a hard time knowing what would need to happen for me to confidently start Melvin Gordon or Mike Boone in fantasy.
Speaking of complicated backfields, we know Cam Akers is not in the future plans or the current plans for the Los Angeles Rams. We have a conglomerate there led by Darrell Henderson. Malcolm Brown is also there. And then Ronnie Rivers also getting some carries last week. I don't necessarily want to talk about any of those guys because none of them are terribly exciting. However, Kyren Williams, you kind of poo-pooed him before, not seeing him as the type of guy that can really change what the Rams want to do on the ground. Is he worth rostering right now as he rehabs from this injury? Or are you still waiting to start utilizing a roster spot, say on a 12-team, 20-man roster like the FFPC? Is it too early to roster Kyren Williams?
I think you can roster him. So I poo-pooed him in terms of if you get Christian McCaffrey in Los Angeles, you're shifting your game plan. You're not going to do it with Kyren Williams. This is not a backfield that's heavily targeting the running back. We know he is a competent runner. We know he is a very, very competent pass catcher. Basically, he does everything well except he's slow, right? Kyren Williams was like the biggest combine faller because he ran like a mid 4.6 when he was 200 pounds. Not good. But in terms of what do I like about Kyren Williams' profile? It's that he's a rookie on an offense that we have seen be good before. We're not necessarily going to see some ridiculous Malcolm Brown, Ronnie Rivers type transformation for fantasy. Kyren Williams could happen because until we see him, we just never know what the rookie's role is. That's why I always love rostering rookies on the back of my bench. Is you just never know. They don't have NFL experience. We don't truly know what the coaching staff thinks of them. And usually you just once you get to those kind of lower ranges of your bench, you take the black box. You say, hey, do I want 6 fantasy points a game or do I take the mystery box? That's the point where you just take the mystery box. So that's why I'd say, yeah, FFPC, 20-man rosters, sure. Throw them on the very end of your bench as like your 19th, 20th player, and we'll see what happens over the next 2-3 weeks.
I want to get into some fantasy sleepers that might help out the viewers this week. And, sleeper is a hard term to define because it means different things to different people. The list I chose here is a list of players that I think are all fringy for your starters. In other words, a guy right around your top 10, top 12 quarterbacks, a guy right around your top 20, top 24 running backs. And 36, 48 receivers, like a flex guy there, and then top 12, tight ends. So I don't necessarily think these guys are sleepers, but I think it's important to discuss their potential output in week 7. We'll start at the quarterback position. You have Jared Goff, I believe ranked 9th right now in your rankings. I could be wrong on that. I'll have to double check.
That's correct. So
Jared Goff going up against Cowboys. Go ahead.
So in my rankings, I have Lamar Jackson number 1. There's no Hurts. There's no Allen. That is a tier of itself. My quarterbacks 2 through 8, I honestly could hear an argument for how people could shift all those guys.
Mm-hmm.
Goff at 9 is a tier break. Basically, Goff all the way down to my QB 14 of Marcus Mariota. I really couldn't bat an eye. If you wanted to shift those guys around, I'd say, great, shift them around, do what you want. I would stream Jared Goff. I think he is a top 12 option, but I'm not going to push back too hard. If for some reason you even said like, hey, like Garoppolo, Mariota, I'm starting this guy instead, I'd say, okay, that's fine. I would start Goff. I will not push back very strongly on this. What I like about Goff is that it is a high game total with Dallas. They're going to have to pass to stay competitive. Amon-Ra should be fully healthy. Swift is going to be healthy. There's really good weapons here. It's a great offensive line. I know the Dallas front is good. I think the Lions can handle them. So I think Goff is just a nice, safe option this week.
Running back. I can't believe it's, we're 15 minutes until the end of the show. And we haven't talked about the Ravens situation, but J.K. Dobbins, according to John Harbaugh, his knee locked up on him a little bit last week, and it turned into a big day for Kenyon Drake. And now we don't know what's going to be going on with the Ravens running back situation. I know you could pretty much say this about every Ravens running back situation for the last few years every week, but Kenyon Drake gets the Cleveland Browns this week in Baltimore. And this is a guy who's almost in your top 20 this week, coming in at number 22.
I like Kenyon Drake. What can I say? He's got the Browns. My biggest whiff, I loved them as a streaming defense early in the year because they had 4 horrible offenses matched up, and they also put up horrible defensive performances. The Browns, pretty much by every metric, are a bottom 3 defense. It's basically like, what's crazy is like the worst defenses in the NFL this year. It's like the Seahawks. We kind of saw that coming. The Lions, we saw that coming. And then the Browns. And you're like, whoa, wait. The Browns are in the conversation with the Lions and the Seahawks? I'm like, yeah. Look at every single metric. Watch them just play on film. They're not stopping anybody. So I think Kenyon Drake's in a good spot. I have him RB22, assuming J.K. Dobbins misses or is highly limited. It's just a terrifying situation. The guy had a surgically repaired knee, and then it tightens up while he's on a snap count. I don't like that. This is give me flashbacks. I'm a Chargers fan. It's giving me flashbacks to Keenan Allen and this hamstring. I just hate when a guy has a legitimate injury and then all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, it's kind of acting up again. And I'm like, wait, what do you mean? So he wasn't fully healthy?
Right.
I just don't understand why they would play J.K. Dobbins this week. This team has playoff aspirations. They're going to want J.K. Dobbins back for that. Gus Edwards is also getting close. I think you just roll with what would it be like Kenyon Drake, and is Mike Davis the next guy up if Dobbins misses? I think so. That's kind of the committee I would expect as of right now.
We talked about DeAndre Swift earlier this segment, number 12 on your rankings, but Jamal Williams coming in at number 24. Is this like a shootout type play that you think that Detroit actually has 2 top 24 options this week in their backfield?
It's just that Jamal Williams had a good role. Even when Swift was fully healthy, Jamal Williams was still, even with fully healthy Swift, getting double-digit carries, getting 1 or 2 targets a game, and getting a little bit of goal line work and a good offense with a good offensive line. And with the buys, with the state of the running back position after the elite guys, I mean, I don't know. Like, let me read these names to you. Like, RB22, Kenyon Drake. 23, Tony Pollard. 24, Jamal Williams. 25, Najee Harris. 26, David Montgomery. Now, I don't know. These kind of all feel like guys. And I like that Jamal Williams has pretty significant touchdown upside in this offense. I like that he's also just kind of good at football. And I think there's also just the chance that Swift is limited. So I think, like, let's just say Swift is fully healthy. You're still probably getting double-digit carries from Jamal Williams. If Swift is limited, suddenly you could get 15 carries and 3 targets from this guy.
Yeah.
So I just think he's a nice, safe option with a decent amount of upside depending on Swift's health and usage.
I definitely was ready to plant. I have a lot of Jamal Williams shares. I was definitely ready to plant him on my bench when I submit lineups before the game tomorrow night. Now I may not do that. I'm going to have to take a harder look at that. You're making a pretty strong case for Jamal Williams as a back end RB2. Juju Smith-Schuster, interesting stuff from him. So he has played in 6 games now for the Kansas City Chiefs. In 4 of those 6 games, he's had 8 targets. And they've been quiet because he never topped. He topped 80 yards once okay, receiving wise. Until last week, he only saw 5 targets, but he catches all 5, 113 yards and a touchdown. He's in your rankings this week for receivers at 22 against the San Francisco 49ers defense. Is Smith-Schuster ready to sort of take that role as the number 1 receiver, not pass catcher, because we know it's Travis Kelce, in Kansas City?
I would temper expectations. So I mentioned earlier in the show that this is a good week for running back. Just like a lot of these top options, like Jonathan Taylor's RB13 for me. Like that just shows like there's really, really strong running backs up high. Receiver is not like that. We talked earlier in the show, we lost 6 pretty solid starts. 3 of them elite with Kupp, Diggs, and Jefferson. So Juju at wide receiver 22, he's not projecting strongly. For me, I think he's just fine. He had 5 targets. That was looking right now. That was a 14% target share. Congrats, Juju. You had wide receiver 3 usage, free growing. I just can't get too excited about him. He's wide receiver 22 because I think the Chiefs will have to throw in this one. I think this is a decent shootout conditions. It's probably going to be kind of inefficient because of the 49ers defense, but I think they're going to have to lean on the pass game a decent amount in this one. So my wide receiver 22, I mean, in a normal week, think about him as a wide receiver 3. We'll put it that way. Based on the buys and the bad matchups, he is more of a wide receiver 3 masquerading as the wide receiver 22 because of different circumstances outside of his control. So I'm not confidently starting him. I am starting him because I have to.
Zay Jones was a real popular pick, Josh, a few weeks ago after he had that 10 for 85 performance. And then he promptly missed the following game, came back with 8 targets, only caught 3 of them for 12. This past week against the Colts in Indy, catches all 5 of his targets for 42 yards. Now this week, he goes back home. He takes on the Giants. He's coming off a game where he had a 26% target share against the Colts. What are your thoughts on Zay Jones this week in New York? Against New York, I beg your pardon.
I like Zay Jones. I've been a truther of his for a while. He had the draft capital. He's really big. He's really fast. He's finally kind of put it together in spurts over the last couple seasons. I think he's a good play this week. It's kind of the state of the wide receiver position. I think he's got some kind of floor. He's got some kind of ceiling. So I kind of have him looking at my rankings. He's in kind of this like Michael Gallup, Brandon Cooks, Terry McLaurin type range. All the receivers where you're not necessarily just extremely excited to start them, but you kind of know what you think you're getting out of him. So I think Zay Jones is probably going to give you 8 to 10 targets. I would expect 10 to 15 fantasy points most likely out of him. I think last week was kind of an anomaly in terms of the efficiency being that bad. So I think he's fine this week. I'll be starting him in multiple leagues.
I want to give you some leeway and some room to talk about this next guy. Alec Pierce looked pretty good, and he's had a couple of really good games this year. Alec Pierce, wide receiver 37 in your rankings this week. He gets the Titans in Tennessee. Your thoughts on Pierce as a start this week?
So we talked earlier about how we like these rookie receivers. We like these rookie running backs. You want rookies on the back of your bench. Pierce is a great example. What has he done? He's given you either 7 targets or 61 receiving yards in each of the past 4 games. He is carving out a role. Weeks 3 and 4, the route participation was around 40%. The past 2 weeks, in weeks 5 and 6, it was over 70%. He's becoming a borderline full-time player. What do we know about Paris Campbell? He's not very good at football. We've seen this for year after year. He's not very good at football, or he's injured, or both. Alec Pierce actually might be kind of good at football. I really like him just going forward where this Colts offensive line is finally getting healthier. Matt Ryan finally has more time to throw. The offense actually looked really, really good this past week. So I'm going to start Alec Pierce as a wide receiver 3 type pretty confidently, where I say, hey, like in these deeper leagues, yeah, we're throwing Alec Pearson. Like FFPC, I am starting him in a Football Guys tournament entry of mine. Mm-hmm. He will be one of those 2 flex plays. And I think that type of league format, that is perfectly okay. PPR, sure, we'll fire up Alec Pierce. He's pretty much a lock for 6 to 8 targets. And the ADOT is pretty high. This is the type of player I like.
Speaking of the FFPC format, I think this fits this next player, Greg Dulcich, who is coming off his best performance, his only performance as a rookie, as he made his debut last week on Monday Night Football, catches a touchdown. He gets the Jets at home this week. And Dulcich is, you have him at 16. So he's obviously not a top 12 option for you this week. But in a tight end premium format where you have two flexes, all of a sudden Dulcich becomes relevant here.
Yeah, I think he's kind of a borderline flex in the FFPC where you start him in tight end premium in the second flex. I really like Dulcich as kind of we're going to put him on the bench and see what happens. But there's quote unquote upside. So Dulcich, we knew he was athletic. He had the third round draft capital. That's all very, very good. In his first game ever, he has 3 targets. One of those targets is in the red zone. The other is in the end zone. That is what I like to see, is that Russ just from day one said, you know what, we're making throws in the most critical part of the field, and it's going to go to Greg Dulcich. Maybe it's the long flowing hair, and he just saw the hair moving and said, that's what I'm throwing to. I don't know what it is, but yeah, it's not great to only have 3 targets, but he caught 2 of them for 44 yards and a touchdown. I think he's one of the better types of players that you can just stash on your bench and see what happens, where it's like, especially in tight end premium, where it's like, hey, there's Sutton, there's Judy, there's not much else because they lost Javonte, their star pass catching running back. Tim Patrick's out for the year. KJ Hamler has done nothing. There is a definite room there. And if Russ, for some reason, can figure out what's going on and put it together, or if Hackett can finally learn how to play call like an adult, then I think there's real potential for Greg Dulcich.
We are fast running out of time here. And I want to give you time to talk about the 33rd team. Just real quick, one prop, and I saw you tweeting about this today. DraftKings has the minus 120 on the over-under 36.5 yards for the longest completion for Kyler Murray on Thursday Night Football. You have a strong opinion on this, Josh.
Yeah, I would take the under. Kyler's longest completion of the year was 32 yards. Marquise Brown was the field stretcher. He's gone. You're basically just praying for a Robbie Anderson bomb. I know some people out there, they're like, oh, look at the Saints. They're allowing a lot of big plays. And I'm like, yeah, but this is more of an offense-driven league. The Cardinals' offensive line is bad. Kyler Murray has looked bad. I just don't understand why we're going to suddenly assume that this offense transforms in this Thursday night matchup when often the Thursday night matchups are not even particularly offensively heavy. So much flux in this wide receiver room. I hammered the under on this. I put a good amount of money, put a few units on it. I think that's just a smash play. If you can get it around 36.5, 35.5, take that under.
And as you pointed out, for anybody saying, well, Hopkins is back this week, your retort to that is when you look at DeAndre Hopkins, what he did on big pass plays last year, it was lacking quite a bit.
Yeah, Hopkins had a 37 or higher reception in 2 games last year out of his 10. So not great. Not great. So for everyone out there, it's like, oh, it's going to change everything. Well, it didn't change everything for Hopkins last year. Why would it this year when the offensive line is further deteriorated, when Kyler Murray does not look good? Just take the under.
Josh, for anybody who's not familiar with the 33rd team, give them the quick and dirty in about 60 seconds of what your site is all about.
So I think what makes us unique is that we combine football knowledge with fantasy gambling betting. A lot of sites out there, they take a very, very heavy data-driven approach. We do as well. We pay a lot of money for data. I am an analytics guy, but we also have this other wing of the company that is former players, former head coaches, contributing analysis, giving us insider information. And I think that harmony is really what sets us apart, is that ultimately, if you're going to place a bet, if you're going to have a fantasy take, if the analytics supports it, and if the former NFL player who's watching the film supports it, there's a pretty good chance that is the right player to take, the right bet to take. And I think that's kind of our secret sauce at the33rdteam.com, where all of our content is free for 2022.
At the 33rd Team FB on Twitter, at JLarky Tweets on Twitter, at JLarky Talks on TikTok, and of course, the33rdteam.com. Josh, what a pleasure. You were awesome. This is so much fun. We're going to have to get together and do this again at some point this season or maybe in the off season as well.
I think we will, Eric. Yeah, thanks for having me on. Thanks to everyone at Better Sports Network, FFPC. This was a blast. If I'm going to stay up late, what better way than talking football?
We'll be back next week, 10/9 Central, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for watching.